Move your car, lady. The man's voice cuts through the garage. His wife laughs, recording on her phone. They think they're putting a stranger in her place. But when she says, "I'm Judge McKnight," they just sneer, calling her a liar. 90 minutes later, they'll be standing in her courtroom, wishing they'd believed her. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're ready for the full story, tap that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow's story is going to be even crazier than this one. Let's get started. The heat arrived early that Tuesday morning. The kind of oppressive humidity that turned the air thick and made every breath feel like work. Judge Elaine McKnight felt it the moment she stepped out of her sedan in the courthouse parking garage, the coolness of her car's air conditioning evaporating into the stagnant warmth of Level B. She checked her watch, 7:47 a.m., and allowed herself a small smile. Plenty of time before her 9 o'clock docket, which meant she could review the fraud case one more time, maybe even enjoy her coffee while it was still hot. The parking garage was a concrete cavern, dimly lit despite the fluorescent strips overhead. Half of them flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced across the oil-stained floor. Elaine had parked in her usual spot near the elevator bank, marked with a small placard that read, "Reserved Judge E. McKnight, District Court." She gathered her leather briefcase from the passenger seat, her robe bag draped over her arm, and pushed the door shut with her hip. The click of her heels echoed in the empty space as she walked toward the elevator. She was thinking about the Harvin case, a civil fraud matter involving a real estate development scheme that had bilked elderly investors out of nearly $4 million. The plaintiffs were a group of retirees who'd trusted Frederick and Helen Harvin with their life savings, lured by promises of luxury condos that were never built. The evidence was damning. Forged permits, shell companies, money laundered through offshore accounts. Elaine had spent the previous evening reviewing depositions, and the pattern was clear. The Harvins were guilty, and today she would hear closing arguments before rendering her decision. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't immediately notice the couple standing near the elevator until she was almost upon them. They were dressed expensively, the man in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, the woman in a cream-colored dress with a designer handbag dangling from her wrist. Both were white, somewhere in their late 50s, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of country clubs and vacation homes. The woman's blonde hair was styled in stiff waves, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. The man stood with his hands in his pockets, his jaw set in an expression of perpetual irritation. Elaine recognized them instantly. Frederick and Helen Harvin, her 9 o'clock case. For a split second, she considered turning around, taking the stairs instead, avoiding the awkwardness of sharing an elevator with people who would soon be on the receiving end of her judgment. But that would be ridiculous. This was her courthouse, her parking garage, and she had every right to use the elevator. Besides, they didn't know who she was. She'd been careful to avoid any pre-trial contact, and her nameplate wasn't visible on her briefcase. She continued walking, her heels clicking, steadily against the concrete. Helen Harvin noticed her first. The woman's eyes swept over Elaine with the kind of casual assessment that wealthy white women often employed, a quick, dismissive glance that catalogued and categorized in an instant. Elaine saw the exact moment Helen's expression shifted from boredom to something else. Suspicion, maybe, or disdain. "Excuse me," Helen said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This level is reserved parking only." Elaine stopped, her hand tightening slightly on her briefcase handle. She kept her expression neutral, professional. "I'm aware. I park here every day." Helen's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. "I don't think so. Reserved spots are for judges and court officials." She said the words slowly, as if speaking to someone who might not understand English. Elaine felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that always came when she encountered this particular brand of ignorance. She'd been a district court judge for 15 years, had graduated summa cum laude from Yale Law, had clerked for a federal appellate judge, and had built a reputation as one of the most fair-minded jurists in the state. But none of that mattered to people like Helen Harvin, who looked at her dark skin and natural hair and saw only someone who didn't belong. "I am a court official," Elaine said evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me." She moved to step around them, but Frederick Harvin shifted his position, blocking her path to the elevator. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, with the kind of build that had once been athletic but had softened with age and privilege. He looked down at Elaine with barely concealed contempt. "Hold on a minute," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You can't just park wherever you want. These spots are assigned. What's your name?" Elaine's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice calm. "I don't need to provide you with my name. I park here legally, and I'm asking you to step aside." Helen laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Oh, this is rich. Fred, she thinks she can just—" She waved her hand dismissively. "Honey, I don't know who you think you are, but people like you should use the service entrance. This area is for professionals." The words hung in the air like poison. People like you. Elaine had heard variations of this phrase her entire life. In college, when a professor assumed she was there on an affirmative action scholarship, rather than a full academic merit award. In law school, when a study group partner suggested she might be more comfortable in a different section. In her first year on the bench, when a defense attorney asked if she was really qualified to hear a complex securities case. People like you. She'd learned long ago that responding with anger only confirmed their prejudices. The angry black woman stereotype was a trap, one that could derail careers and undermine credibility. So Elaine had developed a different strategy: icy professionalism, unshakable composure, and an absolute refusal to be diminished. "I'm going to ask you one more time to step aside," Elaine said, her voice dropping to a tone she usually reserved for attorneys who tried to argue after she'd made a ruling. "I have business in this building, and you're blocking my access." Frederick's face reddened. "You need to learn some respect. Do you know who we are?" "We have a case in this courthouse today. A very important case, and we don't need some—" He caught himself, but the unspoken word hung between them anyway. "Some clerk or secretary giving us attitude." Helen stepped closer, her expensive perfume cloying in the humid air. "Maybe you're lost. The bus stop is 2 blocks that way." She pointed towards the garage exit, her diamond bracelet catching the flickering fluorescent light. Elaine's hands were shaking now, but she kept them steady on her briefcase. She could feel her heart pounding against her ribs, could taste the metallic tang of adrenaline on her tongue. Every instinct screamed at her to put these people in their place, to unleash 15 years of pent-up frustration at every microaggression, every assumption, every casual cruelty she'd endured. But she was a judge. She wore the robe, and she had a courtroom waiting. "My name," Elaine said slowly, clearly, "is Judge Elaine McKnight. I serve on the district court bench, and I will see you both in courtroom 5A at 9 o'clock this morning." The effect was instantaneous and almost comical. Frederick's face went from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. Helen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Helen laughed again, but this time it was nervous, uncertain. You're joking. You can't be—" "I assure you, Mrs. Harvin, I am not joking." Elaine stepped forward, and this time Frederick moved aside, his expensive shoes scraping against the concrete. "I suggest you and your husband take this time to consult with your attorney. You're going to need all the preparation you can get." She walked past them, pressed the elevator call button, and waited. The silence behind her was deafening. She could feel their eyes on her back, could practically hear the gears turning in their heads as they tried to calculate how badly they'd just damaged their case. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. Elaine stepped inside and turned to face them. Frederick and Helen stood frozen in the same spot, their faces masks of shock and dawning horror. "See you at 9, Elaine said, and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. The doors closed, and only then did she allow herself to exhale. Her hands were trembling violently now, and she set her briefcase down to steady herself against the elevator wall. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished metal doors. A black woman in a navy blue suit, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears of rage and humiliation. 15 years on the bench, and it still happened? Still. The elevator rose smoothly, and Elaine forced herself to breathe deeply, to center herself. She had a job to do. She had a courtroom to run, a case to decide, and a reputation to uphold. Whatever the Harvins had just done in that parking garage, it couldn't affect her judgment. She was a professional. She was a judge. But as the elevator doors opened onto the 3rd floor, where her chambers waited, Elaine McKnight allowed herself one small, grim smile. The Harvins had no idea what they'd just walked into. And in 90 minutes, they were going to find out. Elaine's chambers were a sanctuary of dark wood and leather-bound law books, a space she'd carefully cultivated over 15 years to reflect both her authority and her personality. Framed degrees hung on one wall. Her undergraduate diploma from Spelman College, her JD from Yale, certificates of admission to various bars. On another wall, photographs. Elaine shaking hands with the governor at her investiture ceremony. Elaine with her daughter Jasmine at her high school graduation. A faded picture of her parents on their wedding day. Her father in his army uniform. Her mother in a simple white dress. She set her briefcase on the mahogany desk and hung her robe bag on the hook behind the door. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but the anger still simmered beneath her skin like a low-grade fever. "Morning, Judge." Marcus Chen appeared in the doorway, a steaming cup of coffee in each hand. He was 28, whip-smart, and had been her clerk for 2 years. He had an uncanny ability to anticipate her needs and a work ethic that reminded Elaine of herself at that age. "Thought you might need this. Big day." Elaine accepted the coffee, gratefully. "You have no idea." Marcus settled into one of the chairs across from her desk, his own coffee cradled in his hands. He was wearing his usual uniform, pressed khakis, button-down shirt, tie that was just slightly askew. "I pulled the final exhibits for the Harvin case. Everything's organized by plaintiff. The forensic accountant's report is particularly damning. They're going to have a hard time explaining away those wire transfers." "They're going to have a hard time with a lot of things," Elaine muttered, then caught herself. She took a long sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle her nerves. Marcus tilted his head, studying her with the kind of perceptiveness that made him an excellent clerk. Something happen? Elaine considered deflecting, but Marcus had proven himself trustworthy time and again. More than that, he'd become something of a friend, despite the professional boundaries she tried to maintain. I ran into the Harvins in the parking garage. They didn't know who I was. Oh. Marcus's expression shifted from curiosity to understanding. Oh no, what did they? They told me to use the service entrance, suggested I might be more comfortable at the bus stop. Elaine's voice was flat, clinical, as if she were reciting facts from a case file rather than describing her own humiliation. Frederick physically blocked my path. Helen made it very clear that people like me don't belong in reserved parking. Marcus's face flushed with anger. Judge, that's harassment. You should file a complaint. There are cameras in the garage, right? We can get the footage. And then what? Elaine set her coffee down, leaning back in her chair. I file a complaint against the defendants in a case I'm about to decide. How do you think that looks? The headlines write themselves. Judge files. Harassment claim against defendants on trial date. Their attorney would have grounds for recusal, maybe even a mistrial. Everything we've worked toward for the past 6 months, all those elderly victims waiting for justice, it all goes away because I couldn't handle a parking garage confrontation. That's not fair, Marcus said quietly. You shouldn't have to just take that. Fair? Elaine laughed, but there was no humor in it. Marcus, I've been a black woman in America for 52 years. Fair is a fairy tale we tell law students. What matters is what I can prove, what I can control, and how I can do my job without giving people like the Harvins ammunition to use against me. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming against his coffee cup. What did you say to them? When they realized who you were? I told them I'd see them in court at 9 o'clock. Elaine allowed herself a small smile. You should have seen their faces. I wish I could have. Marcus grinned, then sobered. But seriously, Judge, if they try anything, if they make this an issue— They won't, Elaine said with more confidence than she felt. They're not stupid. Well, they're stupid enough to commit fraud and then represent themselves in the parking garage confrontation. But their attorney isn't stupid. Victoria Langford knows better than to make this a thing. At the mention of Victoria's name, Marcus's expression shifted again. You know her, right? From law school? Elaine's jaw tightened. We were classmates, not friends. That was an understatement. Victoria Langford had been Elaine's rival from the first day of contracts class, when they'd both been called on by Professor Hendricks, and Elaine had given the better answer. Victoria had never forgiven her for it. Over 3 years, their competition had intensified. Grades, moot court, law review positions. It had culminated in their final year when they'd both competed for the Ames Moot Court Trophy, the most prestigious award the school offered. Elaine had won. Victoria had accused her of stealing her research, of somehow cheating, though she'd never been able to prove it because it wasn't true. The accusation had been investigated and dismissed, but the damage to their relationship had been permanent. They'd graduated, gone their separate ways, and Elaine had assumed she'd never have to deal with Victoria Langford again. Then Victoria had shown up 6 months ago as the Harvins' attorney, and Elaine had realized that some rivalries never really ended. She's good, Marcus said carefully. Her closing argument is going to be polished, but the evidence is on our side. I mean, on the plaintiff's side. Evidence doesn't always matter when you're good at telling stories, Elaine said. And Victoria is very good at telling stories. She'll paint the Harvins as ambitious entrepreneurs who made mistakes, not criminals. She'll make the plaintiffs look greedy, like they were trying to get rich quick, and are now crying foul because the investment didn't pan out. She'll argue that this is a civil dispute, not fraud, and that her clients shouldn't be punished for the plaintiff's poor judgment. But the forged permits were the work of a contractor who's conveniently disappeared. The shell companies? Standard business practice for real estate development. The offshore accounts? Perfectly legal tax planning. Elaine ticked off the arguments on her fingers. Victoria will have an explanation for everything. It won't be a good explanation, and it won't hold up under scrutiny, but it'll be enough to create doubt. That's all she needs. Marcus frowned. You sound like you think she might win. No, Elaine said firmly. I don't think she'll win. The evidence is too strong, and I've seen enough fraud cases to recognize the pattern. But I'm not underestimating her. That's a mistake I won't make. A knock on the door interrupted them. Elaine's judicial assistant, Patricia Okonkwo, poked her head in. She was a Nigerian immigrant in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that Elaine deeply appreciated. Judge, the parties are starting to arrive. Courtroom 5A is ready whenever you are. Elaine checked her watch. 8:35. Thank you, Patricia. I'll be down in 15 minutes. Patricia nodded and withdrew, closing the door softly behind her. Marcus stood, gathering his coffee cup. I'll make sure everything's set up. The plaintiff's attorney asked if he could display the forensic report on the screen. I told him that was fine, right? That's fine. Just make sure Victoria gets the same courtesy if she wants to use visual aids. Elaine rose from her chair, moving to the window that overlooked the courthouse plaza. Below, people streamed in and out of the building, attorneys with briefcases, defendants with worried faces, families supporting loved ones through the legal system's machinery. Judge? Marcus paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you're handling this exactly right. The parking garage thing, I mean. You're not letting it affect your judgment, and you're not giving them any ammunition. That takes real strength. Elaine turned from the window, offering him a genuine smile. Thank you, Marcus. That means more than you know. After he left, Elaine stood alone in her chambers, the morning sunlight streaming through the window and casting long shadows across her desk. She thought about the Harvins, about the look on their faces when she'd identified herself. She thought about Victoria Langford, about old rivalries and new battles. She thought about the 8 elderly plaintiffs who would be sitting in her courtroom in 20 minutes, hoping for justice after losing their life savings. And she thought about her daughter Jasmine, who was finishing her sophomore year at Howard University and wanted to go to law school. Jasmine, who'd called last week and asked, "Mom, is it worth it, being a black woman in law? Do you ever feel like you're fighting a battle you can't win?" Elaine had told her daughter the truth. Yes, it's worth it. Yes, you'll fight battles that feel impossible. But you fight them anyway, because someone has to. And because every victory, no matter how small, makes it easier for the next woman who comes after you. She moved to the hook behind her door and lifted her robe from its bag. The black fabric was heavy, substantial, a physical manifestation of the authority she'd earned through years of hard work and sacrifice. She slipped it on, fastening the zipper and adjusting the collar. Judge Elaine McKnight looked at herself in the small mirror mounted on the back of her door. The woman staring back at her was composed, professional, ready. The woman staring back at her was also angry, hurt, and tired of being underestimated. But that woman knew how to do her job. That woman knew how to be fair, even when fairness hadn't been extended to her. That woman knew that the robe she wore represented something bigger than her own feelings, bigger than one humiliating encounter in a parking garage. Elaine picked up the case file for Harvin vs. Harvin, tucked it under her arm, and walked out of her chambers. It was time to go to work. The hallway leading to courtroom 5A was crowded with people. Elaine recognized several of the plaintiffs, elderly men and women in their Sunday best, faces lined with worry and hope. They nodded respectfully as she passed, and she returned the gesture with a slight smile. These were the people who mattered. These were the people she was here to serve. The courtroom itself was one of the larger ones in the building, with high ceilings and dark wood paneling that gave it an air of gravitas. The judge's bench sat elevated at the front, the seal of the district court mounted on the wall behind it. 2 tables faced the bench, one for the plaintiffs, one for the defendants. The gallery was already filling with spectators, journalists, and curious onlookers drawn by the high-profile nature of the case. Elaine entered through the judge's private entrance, a door that led directly from the back hallway to her bench. The bailiff, a veteran named Raymond Tucker, stood at attention. "All rise," he called out, his voice booming through the courtroom. The Honorable Judge Elaine McKnight presiding. The room rustled as everyone stood. Elaine climbed the steps to her bench, settled into her chair, and surveyed the courtroom. Her eyes swept over the plaintiff's table, where Attorney Gerald Reeves sat with his clients. Then she looked at the defense table. Frederick and Helen Harvin sat on either side of Victoria Langford. Frederick's face was carefully neutral, but Elaine could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of the table. Helen looked pale, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. She wouldn't meet Elaine's eyes. Victoria, on the other hand, stared directly at Elaine with an expression that was hard to read. Professional courtesy? Barely concealed hostility? Old resentment bubbling to the surface? Elaine didn't let her gaze linger. "Please be seated," she said, and the courtroom settled with a collective exhale. "Good morning. We are here for closing arguments in the matter of Reeves et al. Versus Frederick and Helen Harvin. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that this courtroom operates with decorum and respect. I will not tolerate outbursts, commentary, or disruptions of any kind. Is that understood?" A murmur of assent rippled through the gallery. "Mr. Reeves, you may proceed with your closing argument." Gerald Reeves stood, a silver-haired man in his 60s who'd built his career representing victims of financial fraud. "Thank you, Your Honor." As Reeves began to speak, laying out the evidence of the Harvins' fraud in clear, methodical detail, Elaine forced herself to focus entirely on his words. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, and maintained the same professional demeanor she brought to every case. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't quite shake the memory of Helen Harvin's voice in the parking garage. "People like you should use the service entrance," and she couldn't quite shake the feeling that this case was about to become much more complicated than a simple fraud trial. Gerald Reeves was in his element, pacing before the bench with the controlled energy of a seasoned trial attorney. He'd been practicing law for 37 years, and it showed in the way he commanded the courtroom's attention without ever raising his voice. "Your Honor, The evidence in this case tells a story that is both simple and devastating, Reeves said, gesturing toward his clients in the gallery. 8 retirees, teachers, nurses, a postal worker, a small business owner, people who worked their entire lives and saved carefully for their golden years. They trusted the defendants with their life savings because the defendants presented themselves as successful, reputable developers with a track record of completed projects. He clicked a remote, and an image appeared on the courtroom's display screen. A glossy brochure showing luxury condominiums with ocean views, palm trees swaying in a perpetual breeze, happy couples walking along a pristine beach. This is what the Harvins sold them. Paradise Shores, a luxury retirement community in coastal Florida. 52 units, each priced between $75,000 and $120,000. The brochure promised completion within 18 months. It promised quality construction, resort-style amenities, and a lifestyle of comfort and security. Reeves clicked again, and the image changed to a vacant lot overgrown with weeds, a rusted chain-link fence surrounding nothing but dirt and broken concrete. This is what the Harvins actually delivered. Nothing. Not a single unit was built. Not a single foundation was poured. The permits the Harvins claimed to have secured. He held up a stack of documents. Forgeries. The construction company they claimed to have hired. A shell corporation that existed only on paper, registered to a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. The architectural plans they showed investors. Stock images purchased from a website for $200. Elaine watched the Harvins as Reeves spoke. Frederick sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Helen had her hands folded in her lap, her knuckles white. Victoria Langford took notes on a legal pad, her expression professionally detached. But Elaine noticed the way her pen pressed harder against the paper with each of Reeves's accusations. The forensic accountant's report, which has been entered into evidence as Exhibit 47, traces the money trail with devastating clarity, Reeves continued. The defendants collected $4.2 million from investors. Of that amount, less than $50,000, barely 1%, was spent on anything related to the Paradise Shores project. The rest? He paused for effect. The rest was funneled through a series of shell companies and offshore accounts, ultimately ending up in the defendants' personal bank accounts. They used investor money to purchase a vacation home in Aspen, a luxury yacht, a collection of vintage automobiles, and to fund a lifestyle of country club memberships and European vacations. One of the elderly plaintiffs in the gallery, a woman named Dorothy Clark, no relation to Marcus, let out a soft sob. Her husband put his arm around her shoulders. Reeves's voice softened. Mrs. Dorothy invested $85,000 in Paradise Shores. That represented 30 years of savings from her career as an elementary school teacher. She and her husband were planning to retire there, to spend their final years near the ocean, close to their grandchildren who live in Tampa. Instead, they're still working part-time jobs at 73 years old, trying to rebuild what the Harvins stole from them. He turned back to face Elaine directly. Your Honor, this is not a case of a business venture that simply didn't work out. This is not a case of ambitious entrepreneurs who made honest mistakes. This is fraud, pure and simple. The defendants never intended to build Paradise Shores. They intended to steal money from vulnerable people, and they succeeded. The evidence is overwhelming, and justice demands that you find in favor of the plaintiffs and order full restitution. plus punitive damages to send a clear message that this kind of predatory behavior will not be tolerated. Reeves returned to his seat, and the courtroom was silent except for the soft whir of the ventilation system. Elaine made a final note on her legal pad, then looked up. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Ms. Langford, you may present your closing argument." Victoria Langford rose with the kind of fluid grace that came from years of courtroom performance. She was 51, the same age as Elaine, but she'd aged differently. Her face was smooth, almost unnaturally so, suggesting regular visits to a cosmetic dermatologist. Her suit was designer, her jewelry understated but expensive. Everything about her presentation screamed success and sophistication. "Your Honor," Victoria began, her voice warm and reasonable, "my learned colleague has painted a compelling picture, but it's a picture based on selective facts and emotional manipulation rather than legal reality. Let's examine what this case is actually about." She moved to stand beside her clients, placing a hand on Frederick Harvin's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. Fred and Helen Harvin are entrepreneurs. For 30 years, they've been involved in real estate development across 3 states. They've completed 17 projects, creating homes and commercial spaces that have contributed to their communities and provided value to investors. Are they perfect? No. Did the Paradise Shores project fail? Yes, unfortunately it did. But failure is not fraud. Victoria clicked her own remote, and a new image appeared on the screen, a timeline with various dates and events marked. Let's look at what actually happened. In 2019, the Harvins identified a promising piece of land in Florida and began the process of developing Paradise Shores. They hired a contractor, a man named Robert Kellerman, who came highly recommended and had a portfolio of completed projects. They worked with Mr. Kellerman to secure permits, develop plans, and begin the construction process. They accepted investments in good faith, believing that Mr. Kellerman would deliver on his promises. She paused, letting that sink in. But Mr. Kellerman turned out to be a con artist. He forged permits without the Harvins' knowledge. He created shell companies and diverted funds. And when the scheme began to unravel, he disappeared. Fled the country, we believe, though we haven't been able to locate him. The Harvins are victims here, just as much as the investors are. They trusted the wrong person, and everyone suffered as a result. Elaine kept her expression neutral, but internally she was already poking holes in Victoria's argument. The forensic accountant's report had traced the money directly to accounts controlled by the Harvins, not some mysterious contractor. The forged permits bore Frederick Harvin's signature. The shell companies were registered to addresses the Harvins owned. Victoria continued, her voice taking on a note of sympathy. As for the money that the plaintiffs claim was used for personal expenses, the vacation home, the yacht, the cars, these were not purchased with investor funds. The Harvins have substantial personal wealth from their previous successful projects. They've provided documentation showing that these purchases were made with money from their own accounts, not from the Paradise Shores investment pool. The forensic accountant's report, frankly, is based on flawed methodology and assumptions that don't hold up under scrutiny. She clicked to another slide, this one showing a complex diagram of financial transactions. The reality is that real estate development involves multiple accounts, multiple entities, and complex financial structures. What Mr. Reeves characterizes as money laundering is actually standard business practice for managing risk and liability. What he calls shell companies are legitimate business entities used for asset protection. The plaintiff's attorney is taking normal business operations and casting them in the most sinister light possible. Victoria moved closer to the bench, her eyes locked on Elaine's. Your Honor, I understand that the plaintiffs are sympathetic. They're elderly, they lost money, and that's genuinely unfortunate. But sympathy cannot replace evidence, and the evidence in this case does not support a finding of fraud. At most, this is a civil dispute about a failed business venture. The appropriate remedy is not the punitive damages Mr. Reeves is seeking, but rather a structured repayment plan that allows the Harvins to make the plaintiffs whole over time while continuing to operate their business. She returned to her seat, and Elaine saw something flash across Victoria's face. Was it confidence? Or was it something else? A challenge, perhaps directed specifically at Elaine. Thank you, Ms. Langford, Elaine said. Mr. Reeves, do you wish to offer a rebuttal? Reeves stood. Briefly, Your Honor, Ms. Langford's argument about the mysterious contractor Robert Kellerman is creative fiction. We've subpoenaed the Harvins' business records, their emails, their phone logs. There is no evidence that Robert Kellerman exists. No contracts, no correspondence, no payments made to him or any entity associated with him. He's a convenient scapegoat invented to deflect blame. He held up another document. As for the claim that the personal purchases were made with the Harvins' own money, the forensic accountant traced the funds through 6 different accounts, but the source is clear. Investor money went in, and within weeks, equivalent amounts were transferred to the Harvins' personal accounts and used for luxury purchases. The timing is not coincidental. The pattern is not ambiguous. This is fraud, and the evidence proves it beyond any reasonable doubt. Reeves sat down, and Elaine took a moment to review her notes. The courtroom was utterly silent, everyone waiting for her next words. Thank you both for your arguments, Elaine said. This court will take a brief recess while I review the evidence and prepare my ruling. We will reconvene in 1 hour. She struck her gavel once, and the bailiff called out, All rise. Elaine descended from the bench and exited through the private door, her robe swishing behind her. As soon as she was in the hallway, she allowed herself to exhale. Marcus was waiting for her, holding a fresh bottle of water. That was intense. Victoria's really trying to muddy the waters. That's her job, Elaine said, accepting the water and taking a long drink. But the evidence is clear. The question is whether I rule from the bench today or take it under advisement and issue a written opinion later. What are you leaning toward? Elaine considered. Ruling from the bench would be faster, would give the plaintiffs immediate closure. But it would also mean less time to craft her reasoning, less opportunity to create a bulletproof record that would withstand appeal. I'm going to rule today, she decided. These people have waited long enough. They deserve an answer. They walked back to her chambers, and Elaine spent the next 45 minutes reviewing the evidence one more time, making sure her reasoning was sound, her conclusions supported by the record. She drafted an outline of her ruling, anticipating the arguments Victoria would make on appeal and ensuring she addressed each one. At 11:15, Patricia knocked on her door. They're ready for you, Judge. Elaine stood, straightened her robe, and picked up her notes. Let's finish this. The courtroom was even more crowded when she returned, word having spread that a ruling was imminent. Elaine took her seat at the bench, arranged her notes, and looked out at the assembled faces. "Please be seated," she said, and waited for the rustling to subside. "I have reviewed the evidence presented over the course of this trial, including the testimony of witnesses, the documentary evidence, and the forensic accountant's report. I have considered the arguments presented by both counsel in their closing statements. I am now prepared to issue my ruling." She could feel the tension in the room, could see Dorothy Chen gripping her husband's hand, could see Frederick Harvin's face going pale. "The question before this court is whether the defendants engaged in fraud when they solicited investments for the Paradise Shores development project. Fraud requires proof of several elements: a false representation of material fact, knowledge that the representation was false, intent to deceive, justifiable reliance by the victim, and resulting damages." Elaine looked down at her notes, then back up at the courtroom. The evidence in this case overwhelmingly establishes each of these elements. The defendants represented that they had secured permits for the Paradise Shores project. Those permits were forged, and the defendants' own signatures appear on the forged documents. The defendants represented that they had hired a reputable contractor. No such contractor exists, and no evidence has been presented of any legitimate construction contract. The defendants represented that investor funds would be used for the development project. Instead, those funds were systematically diverted to the defendants' personal accounts and used for luxury purchases. Frederick Harvin's head dropped into his hands. Helen stared straight ahead, her face frozen. "Ms. Langford has argued that the defendants were themselves victims of a con artist named Robert Kellerman. However, no evidence of Mr. Kellerman's existence has been presented. No contracts, no correspondence, no business records. This court finds that Mr. Kellerman is a fabrication, created to deflect responsibility for the defendant's own fraudulent conduct." Victoria's pen stopped moving across her legal pad. "Ms. Langford has also argued that the complex financial transactions documented by the forensic accountant represent standard business practice rather than money laundering. This court disagrees. The pattern of transactions, investor funds deposited into the Paradise Shores account, immediately transferred to shell companies, then transferred again to the defendant's personal accounts, is not standard business practice. It is a deliberate attempt to obscure the theft of investor funds." Elaine paused, letting her words settle over the courtroom like a weight. "Therefore, this court finds in favor of the plaintiffs on all counts. The defendants are ordered to pay full restitution to each plaintiff in the amount of their original investment, plus interest calculated from the date of investment. Additionally, this court finds that punitive damages are warranted given the egregious nature of the defendant's conduct and the vulnerability of their victims. The defendants are ordered to pay punitive damages in the amount of $2 million to be divided equally among the plaintiffs." A gasp went through the gallery, followed by muffled sobs. But these were sobs of relief, of vindication. "Furthermore," Elaine continued, her voice hardening, "this court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. The evidence suggests that the defendant's conduct may constitute criminal fraud, and that determination should be made by the appropriate authorities." She looked directly at Frederick and Helen Harvin. "You targeted vulnerable people. You exploited their trust and their dreams of a comfortable retirement. You showed no remorse and no accountability, instead attempting to blame a fictional contractor for your own criminal conduct. This court will not tolerate such behavior, and this ruling reflects the seriousness of your actions." Elaine struck her gavel. "This court is adjourned." "All rise," the bailiff called, but Elaine was already standing, already moving toward her private exit. Behind her she could hear the eruption of voices, the plaintiffs crying and hugging each other, reporters rushing for the doors to file their stories, Victoria Langford's sharp voice demanding to speak with her clients. But Elaine didn't look back. She walked through the door, down the hallway, and into her chambers, where she finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd just done. Justice. She'd delivered justice. And the Harvins, who'd looked at her in a parking garage and seen someone beneath them, someone who should use the service entrance, had just learned exactly who Judge Elaine McKnight was. Marcus appeared in her doorway, grinning. "Judge, that was—" He stopped, his smile fading as he looked past her, out into the hallway. Elaine turned to see Victoria Langford standing there, her face flushed with anger. "We need to talk," Victoria said. Now, Elaine stood behind her desk, her hands resting on the polished mahogany surface. She didn't invite Victoria to sit. "If you have concerns about my ruling, Ms. Langford, you're welcome to file an appeal. But I'm not going to discuss the merits of the case with you in my chambers." Victoria stepped into the office anyway, and Marcus moved to intercept her, but Elaine held up a hand. "It's all right, Marcus. Give us a moment." Marcus hesitated, his eyes darting between the two women, then reluctantly stepped out and closed the door. But Elaine noticed he didn't go far. She could see his shadow through the frosted glass, standing guard just outside. Victoria crossed her arms, her designer handbag dangling from her elbow. "That ruling was personal, Elaine. Don't pretend it wasn't." "Excuse me?" Elaine kept her voice level, but she could feel her pulse quickening. "You need to be very careful about what you're suggesting." "Oh, come on! 4.2 million in restitution plus 2 million in punitive damages? You're trying to destroy my clients financially, and referring them for criminal prosecution? That's vindictive, and we both know it." Elaine moved around her desk, closing the distance between them. "Your clients committed fraud. They stole from 8 elderly people who trusted them. The evidence was overwhelming, and my ruling was based entirely on that evidence. If you're suggesting otherwise, you're dangerously close to crossing a line that will get you sanctioned." Victoria's eyes flashed. "This is about this morning, isn't it? About what happened in the parking garage." So there it was. The real reason for this confrontation. "What happened in the parking garage," Elaine said carefully, "was that your clients harassed me, made racist comments, and physically blocked my path. But that incident had absolutely no bearing on my ruling. I would have reached the same conclusion regardless of their behavior this morning." "Would you?" Victoria tilted her head, studying Elaine with an expression that was part skepticism, part calculation. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you let your personal feelings influence your judgment. And that's grounds for appeal, Elaine. That's grounds for having this entire case thrown out." Elaine felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. This was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Victoria was suggesting that she would use the parking garage incident to attack the ruling, to claim judicial bias. "You weren't there," Elaine said quietly. "You don't know what your client said to me." "Actually, I do know. They told me everything." Victoria's smile was sharp. "They said you were parked in a reserved spot, that they questioned whether you belonged there, and that you became aggressive and threatening. They said you told them you'd make them pay in court. That's a lie. The words came out harder than Elaine intended. That is an absolute lie, and you know it. Do I? Victoria shrugged. I know what my clients told me, and I know that you had a personal confrontation with them mere hours before issuing a ruling that will bankrupt them. That's going to look very bad when we appeal, Elaine. Very bad indeed. Elaine's mind was racing. This was worse than she'd anticipated. The Harvins weren't just going to accept the ruling. They were going to weaponize the parking garage incident, twist it into something it wasn't, and use it to attack her credibility. There are cameras in the parking garage, Elaine said. Security footage that will show exactly what happened. Are there? Victoria's smile widened. That's interesting, because I've already filed a request for that footage as part of our appeal preparation. I'm sure it will be very illuminating. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. You know, Elaine, I always wondered if you really deserved that moot court trophy. If you really were as good as everyone said, or if you just benefited from, let's call it favorable treatment. I guess now we'll find out. The door closed behind her, and Elaine stood frozen in the middle of her chambers, her heart pounding. Marcus burst back in immediately. Judge, I heard some of that. She can't. She can, Elaine said, sinking into her chair. She absolutely can. She's going to claim I was biased, that the parking garage incident influenced my ruling. She's going to paint me as the aggressor, as someone who let personal feelings override judicial judgment. But that's insane. The evidence in the case was overwhelming. Any judge would have ruled the same way. Any judge, yes. But not every judge is a black woman who had a confrontation with white defendants on the same day as the ruling. Elaine rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. Victoria knows exactly what she's doing. She's going to make this about race, about whether I can be objective, about whether I'm too emotional to serve on the bench. Marcus paced in front of her desk. Okay. But the security footage will prove what really happened. It'll show that they harassed you, not the other way around. Will it? Elaine looked up at him. Have you ever actually looked at the cameras in that parking garage? Half of them don't work. The angles are terrible. And even if the footage shows the confrontation, it might not have audio. Without audio, Victoria can claim anything. She can say her clients were being polite and I overreacted. She can say I threatened them, and the footage just doesn't capture it clearly. Then we get witness statements. Someone else must have been in the garage. At 7:45 in the morning? The courthouse doesn't open until 8:30. The only people there that early are judges and a few staff members, and most of them park on different levels. Elaine shook her head. No, Marcus. This is going to come down to my word against theirs, and in that scenario, I'm already at a disadvantage. Marcus stopped pacing. What do you mean? Elaine gestured at herself, at her brown skin, her natural hair. I mean that when a black woman says she was harassed and a white couple says she was aggressive, who do you think people are more likely to believe? Especially when that black woman is a judge who just issued a ruling against that white couple? Victoria is going to use every stereotype, every implicit bias, every assumption about angry black women to undermine my credibility. That's... Marcus struggled for words. That's evil. That's effective, Elaine corrected, and Victoria Langford is nothing if not effective. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. Finally, Marcus spoke. What are you going to do? Elaine took a deep breath, forcing herself to think strategically rather than emotionally. First, I'm going to document everything I remember about the parking garage incident. Every word, every gesture, every detail. I'm going to write it down while it's fresh in my memory, and I'm going to have it notarized and time-stamped. Good. What else? Then I'm going to request the security footage myself through official channels. I want to see exactly what it shows before Victoria gets her hands on it. And I'm going to talk to building security, find out if anyone else was in the garage this morning, anyone who might have seen or heard something. Marcus nodded, pulling out his phone to take notes. I can help with that. I know some of the security staff. What about the Judicial Conduct Office? Should you file a complaint about the harassment? Elaine hesitated. That's the question, isn't it? If I file a complaint, it looks like I'm retaliating against the Harvins for losing their case. But if I don't file a complaint, Victoria will say that proves nothing really happened, that if I'd really been harassed, I would have reported it immediately. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Exactly. Elaine stood and moved to the window, looking out at the courthouse plaza. Victoria has put me in an impossible position. Whatever I do, she'll use it against me. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at it and saw a text from her daughter. Mom, I just saw the news about your ruling. You're amazing! So proud of you! Elaine felt tears prick at her eyes. Jasmine had no idea what was coming. No idea that her mother's career might be about to implode because of a parking garage confrontation and a vindictive attorney with a 20-year-old grudge. Another text came through, this one from her ex-husband, Terrence. Saw the ruling. Impressive. But be careful. These people have money and connections. Terrence. They'd been divorced for 8 years, but he still checked in occasionally. Still offered unsolicited advice. He'd been a corporate attorney, had always thought Elaine's decision to become a judge was foolish. Too much scrutiny, too little pay, too many opportunities for controversy. He'd wanted her to join a big firm, make partner, live a comfortable life without the constant pressure of public service. She'd chosen the bench anyway, and it had been one of the factors that ended their marriage. Now, looking at his text, she wondered if he'd been right. If she'd chosen a path that was always going to be harder for someone who looked like her, who couldn't afford to make even the smallest mistake without it being magnified and weaponized. Judge? Marcus's voice pulled her back to the present. Are you okay? No, Elaine admitted. But I will be. I have to be. She turned from the window, squaring her shoulders. Get me everything you can on the security system in the parking garage. Camera locations, recording schedules, who has access to the footage. And pull the case files for every other case Victoria Langford has handled in this courthouse over the past 5 years. I want to know if she has a pattern of making these kinds of accusations. You think she's done this before? I think Victoria is smart and strategic, and she doesn't make moves without having tested them first. If she's this confident about using the parking garage incident against me, it's because she's successfully used similar tactics before. Marcus headed for the door, then paused. Judge, for what it's worth, I believe you. About what happened this morning. And I think most people who know you will believe you too. Thank you, Marcus. But belief isn't the same as proof, and in a courtroom, proof is all that matters. After he left, Elaine sat down at her computer and opened a blank document. She titled it, Incident Report, Parking Garage, November 7th, 2025, and began to type. At approximately 7:47 a.m., I entered the courthouse parking garage level B and parked in my assigned spot, marked Reserved Judge E. McKnight. As I exited my vehicle and walked toward the elevator, I encountered two individuals later identified as Frederick and Helen Harvin, defendants in a case scheduled before me at 9 a.m. She continued typing, documenting every detail she could remember. Helen's cream-colored dress, Frederick's charcoal suit, the exact words they'd used. People like you should use the service entrance. The way Frederick had physically blocked her path, the look on their faces when she'd identified herself. She was so absorbed in the task that she didn't hear Patricia knock until the older woman was standing right beside her desk. "Judge, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." Elaine looked up, startled. "Who?" "Her name is Dolores Martinez. She's one of the parking attendants." Elaine's pulse quickened. "Send her in." A moment later, a woman in her 50s entered the office. She was short and stocky, with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, and the weathered face of someone who'd spent years working outdoors. She wore a uniform with a name tag that read, D. Martinez Parking Services. Judge McKnight. Her voice was hesitant, accented with the rhythms of Spanish. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I heard about what happened this morning. In the garage." Elaine stood, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Please sit down. What did you hear?" Dolores sat, clutching a worn canvas bag in her lap. "I was there. This morning around 7:45. I was on level B, checking on an oil stain that maintenance needed to clean up. I saw you with those people, the ones in the fancy clothes." Elaine's heart was pounding now. "You saw the confrontation?" "I saw everything." Dolores reached into her bag and pulled out a cell phone, old and scratched but functional. "And I recorded it. I was taking a video of the oil stain for my report, and I accidentally caught the whole thing." She held out the phone, and Elaine took it with trembling hands. On the small screen was a video, paused on an image of the parking garage floor. "I didn't mean to record you," Dolores said quickly. "I was just documenting the stain, like I'm supposed to. But then I heard voices, and I kept the camera running because something felt wrong. The way those people were talking to you." Elaine pressed play. The video was shaky, shot from a low angle as if Dolores had been holding the phone near her waist. But the audio was crystal clear. Helen Harvin's voice. "This level is reserved parking only." Elaine's own voice, calm and professional. "I'm aware. I park here every day." Helen again. "Reserved spots are for judges and court officials." Then Frederick's voice, aggressive and dismissive. "You can't just park wherever you want. What's your name?" The video continued, capturing every word, every insult, every moment of the confrontation. It showed Frederick stepping into Elaine's path, physically blocking her. It showed Helen pointing toward the exit, suggesting Elaine try the bus stop. And it showed Elaine's response, measured and dignified. "My name is Judge Elaine McKnight. I serve on the district court bench, and I will see you both in courtroom 5A at 9 o'clock this morning." The video ended with Elaine walking away, her shoulders straight, her head high. Elaine looked up at Dolores, barely able to speak. "You recorded all of this?" "Yes, ma'am. And I wanted you to know, in case you needed it. I heard those people filed some kind of complaint saying you threatened them. But that's not what happened. I was there. I saw the truth." Elaine felt tears streaming down her face, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "Ms. Martinez, do you have any idea what this means? What you've just given me?" Dolores smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I think I do, Judge. My daughter wants to be a lawyer. She's in college now, working 2 jobs to pay for it. And I tell her all the time, you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She stood, smoothing her uniform. That video is yours now. Do whatever you need to do with it. And if you need me to testify or make a statement or anything, you just let me know. Thank you, Elaine whispered. Thank you so much. After Dolores left, Elaine sat alone in her chambers, holding the phone like it was made of glass. This changed everything. This was proof, undeniable, unambiguous proof of what had really happened in that parking garage. Victoria Langford had made a critical mistake. She'd assumed there were no witnesses, no evidence beyond the security cameras. She'd assumed she could control the narrative. She'd assumed wrong. Elaine picked up her office phone and dialed Marcus's extension. Marcus, get back up here. Now. And bring a notary and someone from IT who can make certified copies of a video file. What happened? We just got our proof, Elaine said, and Victoria Langford is about to learn that she picked the wrong fight. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Elaine had 3 certified copies of Dolores Martinez's video, each one time-stamped and authenticated by the courthouse IT department. Marcus had also obtained a sworn affidavit from Dolores, notarized and filed with the court clerk's office, detailing everything she'd witnessed in the parking garage. But Elaine's relief was tempered by a growing sense of unease. Something about Victoria's confidence in their chambers earlier didn't add up. Victoria was too smart, too experienced to make threats based solely on her client's word against Elaine's. She had to have something else, some other angle she was planning to exploit. The security footage request came back, Marcus said, entering her office with a tablet in hand. And you're not going to like it. Elaine looked up from the case file she'd been reviewing. Show me. Marcus set the tablet on her desk and pulled up a video file. This is from camera 7, which covers the elevator bank on level B. It's the only camera with a clear view of where the confrontation happened. He pressed play, and Elaine watched herself walk across the parking garage toward the elevator. The angle was from above and behind, showing the back of her head and shoulders. Frederick and Helen Harvin came into frame, and there was clearly some kind of interaction, but the camera angle cut off at chest level. Their faces were visible, but their body language was ambiguous. Frederick appeared to be standing still, not obviously blocking anyone's path. Helen's gestures could be interpreted as either aggressive or merely animated conversation. And there was no audio, none at all. The audio system in the garage has been broken for 6 months, Marcus explained. Maintenance keeps putting in work orders, but it's low priority because it's just a parking garage. So we have video but no sound. Elaine watched the footage again, her stomach sinking. Without audio, the video was nearly useless. It showed that an interaction had occurred, but it didn't capture the racist comments, the threats, the physical intimidation. Someone watching this footage without context could easily interpret it the way Victoria would want them to, as a routine conversation that Elaine had overreacted to. There's more, Marcus said grimly. He fast-forwarded to a timestamp of 9:47 a.m., 2 hours after the confrontation. The video showed a figure approaching the camera, reaching up and adjusting something. The angle shifted slightly, and then the figure walked away. Who is that? Elaine asked. We don't know. The resolution isn't good enough to make out facial features. But look at the timestamp on the next segment. Marcus pulled up another file. This is the same camera, same location, but starting at 10:15 a.m. Watch what happens. The video played, showing the normal flow of people coming and going from the elevator. But something was off. Elaine watched it twice before she realized what it was. "The angle is different," she said. "Someone moved the camera." "Exactly. And when I pulled the access logs for the security system, I found something interesting." Marcus pulled up a spreadsheet on the tablet. At 9:52 a.m., someone accessed the parking garage security feed from an external IP address. They viewed Camera 7's footage from this morning, and 5 minutes later, someone physically adjusted the camera. "Can you trace the IP address?" "Already did. It belongs to Langford and Associates. Victoria's law firm." Elaine sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She accessed the footage, saw that it didn't clearly show what happened, and then had someone adjust the camera to make it even less useful for any future incidents. She's tampering with evidence. "It looks that way. But there's a problem." Marcus's expression was troubled. "The security system logs show the access, but they don't prove who specifically at the law firm viewed the footage. It could have been Victoria, or it could have been a paralegal, an assistant, anyone with access to their network. And the person who physically moved the camera isn't visible in any other footage. They knew exactly where the blind spots were. So we can prove someone from Victoria's firm accessed the footage and someone moved the camera, but we can't definitively prove it was Victoria herself or that it was done with malicious intent." "Right. A good attorney, and Victoria is a very good attorney, could argue that someone was legitimately reviewing the footage as part of their appeal preparation, and the camera adjustment was coincidental, maybe a maintenance worker doing their job." Elaine stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city beyond. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse plaza, and she could see people going about their lives, unaware of the battle being waged in these chambers. "She's been planning this," Elaine said quietly. "From the moment her clients told her about the parking garage incident, she's been setting up her attack. She accessed the footage to see what it showed, realized it was ambiguous enough to work with, and then made sure it stayed that way by adjusting the camera. She's building a narrative where I'm the aggressor, where I let personal feelings influence my judicial decision, and she's systematically eliminating any evidence that contradicts that narrative." "But we have Dolores's video," Marcus pointed out. "That's ironclad proof of what really happened." "Is it?" Elaine turned to face him. "Think about how Victoria will attack it. She'll say Dolores is biased, that she's a courthouse employee who's loyal to me. She'll question why Dolores didn't come forward immediately, why she waited until after the ruling. She'll suggest the video was edited or manipulated. She'll do everything she can to cast doubt on its authenticity." "But the IT department certified it. The timestamp is verified." "And Victoria will bring in her own expert who'll testify that timestamps can be faked, that videos can be manipulated, that nothing digital is truly trustworthy." Elaine shook her head. "I'm not saying Dolores's video won't help. It absolutely will. But it's not the slam dunk we need it to be. Not when we're up against someone as skilled as Victoria." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said, "There has to be something else. Some other angle we're not seeing." "There is," Elaine said. "Victoria mentioned in my chambers that her clients told her everything about the parking garage incident, which means there's a record of that conversation somewhere. Notes, emails, maybe even a recorded phone call if they discussed it remotely. If we can get our hands on that record, we can prove that the Harvins lied to their attorney about what happened, and that Victoria knew or should have known they were lying." "Attorney-client privilege," Marcus said immediately. "We'd never get access to those communications." Not directly. But if Victoria uses the parking garage incident as the basis for her appeal, she's putting those communications at issue. The crime-fraud exception to attorney-client privilege applies when a client seeks legal advice to further a crime or fraud. If the Harvins lied to Victoria about what happened, and she's using those lies to file a fraudulent appeal, that's not protected. Marcus's eyes widened. You want to argue that Victoria and her clients are committing fraud on the court. I want to be prepared to make that argument if necessary, Elaine corrected. But first, I need to know more about Victoria's history. You said you were going to pull her other cases? Already done. Marcus pulled up another file on his tablet. Victoria Langford has handled 43 cases in this courthouse over the past 5 years, 31 civil, 12 criminal. She's won or settled favorably in 38 of them. She's very good at what she does. Any complaints filed against her? Any disciplinary actions? No formal complaints, but... Marcus hesitated. I found something interesting. 3 years ago, she represented a defendant in a personal injury case before Judge Raymond Collier. The plaintiff was a black woman who'd been injured in a car accident. During the trial, the plaintiff claimed that Victoria's client had harassed her in the courthouse cafeteria, made racist comments, tried to intimidate her into dropping the case. Elaine felt a chill run down her spine. What happened? The plaintiff filed a complaint, but there was no evidence, no witnesses, no video. It came down to her word against the defendant's word. Judge Collier didn't find sufficient grounds to take action, and the trial continued. Victoria's client won. Let me guess, Elaine said. The plaintiff was portrayed as emotional, unreliable, maybe even vindictive. The trial transcript describes her as agitated and unable to provide consistent testimony. Victoria argued that the harassment allegation was a desperate attempt to gain sympathy from the jury. Marcus looked up from the tablet. Sound familiar? Very familiar. Elaine's mind was working rapidly now, connecting pieces. What about the other cases? Any similar patterns? I'm still going through them, but I found at least 2 more where opposing parties claimed intimidation or harassment by Victoria's clients, and in both cases, the complaints were dismissed due to lack of evidence. In one case, the opposing party was a Hispanic man, in the other, a black man. She has a pattern, Elaine said. She represents wealthy, entitled clients who target people of color, and when those people complain, Victoria uses the system against them. She exploits the fact that people of color are often seen as less credible, more emotional, more likely to make false accusations. And she's been getting away with it for years. So what do we do? Before Elaine could answer, her office phone rang. She picked it up. Judge McKnight. Elaine, it's Raymond Collier. Can you come to my chambers? We need to talk. Chief Judge Raymond Collier was 72 years old, a white man who'd served on the bench for 30 years and had a reputation for fairness and integrity. He was also Elaine's mentor. He'd been the one who'd encouraged her to apply for a judgeship 15 years ago, who'd written one of her recommendation letters, who'd guided her through the political minefield of the judicial appointment process. I'll be right there, Elaine said. She hung up and looked at Marcus. Keep digging into Victoria's case history. I want to know everything. Every complaint, every allegation, every time one of her clients was accused of intimidation or harassment. And get me the names of those plaintiffs. I want to talk to them. You think they'll talk to you? I think they'll want to know they're not alone, Elaine said. That what happened to them wasn't an isolated incident. That someone is finally paying attention. Chief Judge Collier's chambers were larger than Elaine's, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive desk that had belonged to his predecessor. He was standing at his window when Elaine entered, his hands clasped behind his back. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Elaine did, then waited. She'd learned long ago that Collier liked to gather his thoughts before speaking, and interrupting him was counterproductive. Finally, he turned to face her. His expression was grave. "I received a formal complaint this afternoon. From Frederick and Helen Harvin, filed through their attorney, Victoria Langford. They're alleging that you engaged in threatening and intimidating behavior towards them this morning in the courthouse parking garage, and that this behavior demonstrates bias that invalidates your ruling in their case." Elaine had been expecting this, but hearing it stated so baldly still felt like a punch to the gut. "I see. They're also requesting that I initiate a judicial conduct investigation, and that your ruling be vacated pending the outcome of that investigation." Collier moved to his desk and picked up a document. "Victoria has submitted a very detailed complaint. She's included stills from the security footage, statements from her clients, and a legal brief arguing that your conduct violated multiple canons of judicial ethics." "May I see it?" Collier handed her the document, and Elaine read through it quickly. Victoria's writing was as polished as ever, her arguments carefully constructed. She painted a picture of Elaine as someone who'd let personal animosity override professional judgment, who'd used her position to retaliate against people who'd merely questioned her parking spot. The Harvins' statements were even worse. According to them, Elaine had been verbally aggressive and physically threatening. Frederick claimed she'd stepped toward him in a menacing manner. Helen claimed she'd feared for her safety. It was all lies, but it was presented so convincingly, with such careful attention to detail, that Elaine could see how someone who didn't know her might believe it. "This is false," Elaine said, handing the document back. "Every word of it. The Harvins harassed me, not the other way around. They made racist comments, physically blocked my path, and told me I should use the service entrance because people like me don't belong in reserved parking." Collier nodded slowly. "I believe you, Elaine. I've known you for 20 years, and I've never seen you behave inappropriately toward anyone. But belief isn't enough. I have to follow protocol. When a formal complaint is filed, I'm required to investigate." "I understand." Elaine's voice was steady, but inside she was screaming. "What does the investigation entail?" "I'll need to interview you formally, on the record. I'll need to review any evidence, the security footage, witness statements, anything else that's relevant, and I'll need to convene a panel of 3 judges to review the complaint and make a recommendation." "How long will that take?" 2 weeks minimum. Possibly longer if the evidence is complicated, or if there are scheduling conflicts. Collier sat down heavily in his chair. "Elaine, I'm going to be straight with you. This is serious. If the panel finds that your conduct was inappropriate, even if it doesn't rise to the level of invalidating your ruling, it could result in a formal reprimand. That goes on your record permanently. It could affect future appointments, could be used against you in other cases. And if they find that I did let bias influence my ruling?" Collier's expression was pained. "Then the ruling gets vacated, the case gets reassigned, and you could face suspension or even removal from the bench." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. "I have evidence," Elaine said. "A video recorded by a parking attendant named Dolores Martinez. It shows the entire confrontation, with audio. It proves that the Harvins are lying. Collier's eyebrows rose. You have video with audio? Yes. Dolores was documenting an oil stain for a maintenance report and accidentally captured the whole thing. She came to me this afternoon and gave me the recording. I've had it certified and authenticated by IT. That's excellent, Elaine. That could change everything. Collier leaned forward. But you need to be careful about how you present it. Victoria will attack its authenticity, will claim it was manipulated or taken out of context. You need to make sure your chain of custody is airtight. I know. Marcus is handling that. Elaine paused, then decided to share the rest. There's something else. Victoria accessed the security footage from her law firm's IP address this morning, shortly after the confrontation. And someone physically adjusted the camera afterward to make the footage less useful. Collier's face darkened. That's tampering with evidence. We can prove someone from her firm accessed the footage, but we can't prove it was Victoria specifically, and we can't prove the camera adjustment was intentional rather than coincidental. Still, it's suspicious as hell. Collier drummed his fingers on his desk. Elaine, I think Victoria is playing a dangerous game here. If she's knowingly filing a false complaint, if she's tampering with evidence, she could be disbarred. But she's smart enough to have covered her tracks, to have built in plausible deniability. She has a pattern, Elaine said. Marcus found at least 3 other cases where Victoria's clients were accused of harassing or intimidating opposing parties who were people of color, and in each case, the complaints were dismissed due to lack of evidence. She knows how to exploit the system, how to use implicit bias against her opponents. Collier was quiet for a long moment. You're saying she's done this before. I'm saying she's perfected it. And I'm saying that if we don't stop her now, she'll keep doing it. She'll keep representing clients who target vulnerable people, and she'll keep using the legal system to protect them and punish their victims. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious pattern. Elaine met his eyes. Raymond, I need you to trust me on this. I need you to dig deeper into Victoria's history, to look at those other cases, to talk to those other plaintiffs, because this isn't just about me and my ruling. This is about a systemic problem that's been hiding in plain sight. Collier studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll look into it. But, Elaine, you need to understand, even if everything you're saying is true, even if Victoria has been doing this for years, that doesn't automatically invalidate her complaint against you. The investigation still has to proceed. The panel still has to review the evidence. I know, but at least they'll have the full picture. At least they'll understand what they're really dealing with. There's one more thing, Collier said. Until the investigation is complete, I'm going to have to ask you to recuse yourself from any cases involving Victoria Langford or her firm. I know that's not ideal, but it's necessary to avoid even the appearance of retaliation. Elaine nodded. She'd expected this too. I understand. And Elaine? Collier's voice softened. I'm sorry you're going through this. You're one of the best judges I've ever worked with, and you don't deserve to have your integrity questioned. But we'll get through it. The truth will come out. I hope you're right, Elaine said. But as she left Collier's chambers and walked back to her own office, she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth might not be enough. Not when it was up against someone as skilled at manipulation as Victoria Langford. Not when the system itself was designed to doubt people who looked like her. The story exploded on the evening news that night. Headlines screamed, "District Judge faces misconduct complaint after confrontation with defendants." Social media erupted with racist comments questioning Elaine's qualifications and temperament. Her daughter Jasmine called in tears, terrified her mother would lose everything. But Elaine refused to back down. Marcus tracked down victims from Victoria's previous cases, people of color who'd been harassed by Victoria's clients and then discredited when they reported it. Jerome Washington agreed to give a statement. Keisha Thompson, whose personal injury case had been destroyed by Victoria 3 years earlier, came forward ready to testify. Then Angela Reeves arrived, an attorney who'd been documenting Victoria's misconduct for 3 years. She brought boxes of evidence, 8 cases over 10 years where Victoria's clients were accused of harassment, and every single victim was a person of color. Angela had filed a complaint with the state bar 3 years ago, but they'd buried it. Now, with Elaine's platform, they had a chance to finally stop Victoria. Chief Judge Collier warned Elaine that the fight would cost her everything, suggesting she settle and walk away. But Elaine refused. "This isn't just about me anymore. I can't tell those victims their pain doesn't matter." Victoria struck back hard, filing an emergency motion to have Elaine's ruling overturned and the case reassigned. At the hearing before Judge Maria Santos, Victoria presented her carefully constructed narrative. But when Judge Santos watched Dolores's video showing the Harvins' racist harassment, she shut Victoria down cold. "This video shows your clients making racist comments and physically intimidating a judge. Then they filed a complaint claiming she was the aggressor. That's not a difference in recollection. That's perjury. Your motion is denied." Victoria posted a statement on her firm's website, positioning herself as the victim of Elaine's vendetta and threatening to sue for defamation. But Elaine stayed focused. "We don't fight in the media. We fight in court with facts and evidence." 1 week later, the Judicial Conduct Panel convened. Victoria presented her case with polished confidence, but it crumbled under scrutiny. The security guard and court reporter who'd signed declarations against Elaine both admitted under oath that Victoria's office had coached them into making false statements they didn't actually believe. Then Frederick and Helen Harvin took the stand and fell apart. Under questioning from Judge Wu and Judge Torres, they contradicted themselves repeatedly, were caught in obvious lies, and had no explanation for why they'd waited until after losing to file their complaint. Chief Judge Collier delivered the verdict. Judge McKnight behaved appropriately and professionally. The Harvins' complaint is without merit and was filed in bad faith as retaliation for an unfavorable ruling. We are referring this matter to the district attorney for perjury charges and imposing a $50,000 fine. The original fraud ruling stands without modification." Then he turned to Victoria. "We are deeply troubled by your role in this matter. We are referring your conduct to the State Bar Association for investigation of witness coaching, evidence tampering, and a pattern of using false harassment complaints to intimidate opposing parties." Victoria's face went pale. For the first time, she looked afraid. 2 weeks later, State Bar investigator Michelle Okafor met with Elaine. "We found 12 cases showing Victoria's pattern. We also found emails between Victoria and her clients discussing strategies for managing opposing parties who were likely to cause problems." She maintained a private database to discredit victims. The private investigator who adjusted the courthouse camera is cooperating. "We're recommending disbarment, but we need your testimony." 3 months later, at Victoria's disciplinary hearing, the evidence was overwhelming. Victim after victim testified: Keisha Thompson, Jerome Washington, Simone Harris, and others, each telling stories of harassment, intimidation, and systematic silencing. The emails, the witness coaching, the security tampering. It was all there. The disciplinary panel's decision was swift. Victoria Langford has violated multiple rules of professional conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, and misrepresentation. The appropriate sanction is disbarment, effective immediately. Victoria Langford's legal career was over. 6 months later, the final piece of karma arrived. Frederick and Helen Harvin were sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for fraud and perjury. They were ordered to pay full restitution, all $6.2 million, to their victims. 1 year after that parking garage confrontation, Judge Elaine McKnight stood before a room of newly sworn-in attorneys and told them, "The law is not just a profession, it's a calling. You'll face moments when you have to choose between what's easy and what's right. Choose right. Every single time. When we stand together and refuse to be silenced, we can change the world." Keisha, Jerome, Simone, and Angela established the Judge Elaine McKnight Justice Fund, a legal defense fund for people of color facing harassment in the legal system. As Elaine walked through the courthouse halls past the parking garage entrance where it all began, she smiled. She was Judge Elaine McKnight. She'd earned her place through hard work, intelligence, and integrity. And no one, no arrogant couple, no manipulative attorney, no biased system could take that away from her. Justice had prevailed. And it always would, as long as people like her kept fighting for it.
Thanks for staying with us until the end. If you like this story, you're going to love the next one. It's even more thrilling and unbelievable. Don't miss it. Just click the image on your screen to watch now.